The left has decided, and unfortunately the Supreme Court has interpreted the law to allow political gerrymandering based on the color of your skin. And what happens is they move and essentially segregate voters by race to ensure what is called majority-minority districts in order to ensure that Democrats get elected and left-wing Democrats get elected. And that's why we filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court as they're being asked to reconsider this issue. So we're essentially asking the Supreme Court, to affirm a lower court ruling that found that using race to set up congressional districts is an abomination.
Racial gerrymandering. Now, this is a topic I'm willing to bet a lot of Americans don't even realize exists or don't even realize how serious it is. But it is actually a massive problem in America. And it is so important that I'm making this video to go into detail on what it is, what happens when it occurs, and what the future may look like, depending on how the Supreme Court rules on this. Because breaking news came in yesterday that the U.S. Supreme Court has indicated it is going to consider a ban on race-based voting districts. 2 days ago, on August 1st, the Supreme Court asked for new briefs in Louisiana redistricting case. And the Louisiana case being referenced here is Louisiana v. Calais. And essentially, this case was made after the outrageous and overly egregious racial gerrymandering occurred in Louisiana, creating the most absurd district-drawn lines you probably have ever seen. This is what the Louisiana court case is all about. You can see here particularly District 6. This is the most outrageous racial gerrymandering district I think that currently exists in America. It's highlighted in blue here, and you can see District 6 where they really stretch it out deliberately, reaching all the way up to Shreveport and extending all the way down to Baton Rouge. And it's done that way to deliberately create an overrepresentation of black voting people. The blue represents over 50% of black voting age population, whereas the pink represents under 50% of black voting age population. District 2 in Louisiana was the original district that represented a lot of black voters for Louisiana, but they decided, no, that's not good enough. We need a second district for more black representation in our state. And so District 6 was drawn, and it was drawn in the most absurd fashion possible. I mean, this district literally should not exist, and I think anybody looking at this who's honest with themselves knows that it's a deliberate stretch. And now you got to ask yourself, why is this done and how do they get away with doing this? And I've done some research on this. It all comes down to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is, in all fairness, a righteous act. It was a landmark U.S. federal statute that prohibited racial discrimination in voting. It was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson during the height of the Civil Rights Movement on August 6, 1965, and Congress later amended the act 5 times to expand its protections. It was designed to enforce the voting rights protected by the 14th and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution, and the act sought to secure the right to vote for racial minorities throughout the country, especially in the South. Naturalized citizen minorities should be allowed to vote here in this country. Nobody disputes that. However, in true typical Democrat fashion, they take everything that's of the sort like this, anything that provides rights and stands up for the rights of minorities, Democrats take and twist it to fit their narrative and their agenda, most importantly. And so with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, they now cite this as the reason for racial gerrymandering being acceptable. And they do this because they bank, of course, on minority votes being their main ticket into office. And so what winds up happening is with gerrymandering, racial gerrymandering especially, but gerrymandering in general that the Democrats use to their advantage, you wind up with circumstances like Illinois here. Illinois is a state where Republicans earned 43.7% of the vote, so they did not win the majority of the state by technicality. However, winning 43.7% of the vote in Illinois landed the Republicans only 3 out of the total 17 seats for representation. How does that make sense? You would assume with 43.7% of the vote, close to 50, that they should at least have secured 6 or 7 of those seats. And instead they only got 3 because the Democrats have gerrymandered that state into oblivion. You can see that bottom district in blue there, how it's just a thin line drawn deliberately to create an unequal advantage for the Democrats, probably once again based off of race. Now the good news is, with the Republican landscape looking as strong as it does currently, with them controlling literally everything, with the election of November 2024 being a deliberate mandate from the people, winning the House, the Senate, the executive branch, the Electoral College, the popular vote, and all 7 swing states, Texas has finally struck up the nerve to really fight back on this. They just gerrymandered their state in favor of Republicans, doing so in a way that will now land Republicans in additional 5 seats in the 2026 midterms. This has Democrats fuming, with governors like Gavin Newsom now threatening to gerrymander California deliberately to steal away seats from the Republicans representing that state. Mind you, of course, California being as liberal as it is, I think there's only something like 9 total Republican seats in California currently. However, that doesn't stop Gavin Newsom from just openly admitting that he's going to deliberately corrupt the districts of his state by gerrymandering them to force even more Republicans out, all over the outrage of Texas doing this. And you know, the whole thing with redistricting your state is it's supposed to be done every so often, I think every 10 years if I'm not mistaken, to make sure that the representation from voting based off of counties, districts, etc. is accurately representing the population that lives there. And so what you have is you have Republicans in a very Republican state like Texas fairly redistricting their state to create the accurate representation of the people living there. Texas is a very Republican state. There's just no getting around it. But what the Democrats do, like as shown here in Illinois, they deliberately cheat the system. And then the numbers can't even hide the fact that they're cheating the system because, again, 43.7% of the vote to Republicans landed them only 3 out of 17 seats. That is literally not correct representation based off of the voting that occurred there. And the Democrats do this purely to maintain as much control as possible. And the Republicans are notoriously terrible at fighting the opposition presented to them from the opposing party. So it's good to see Texas doing this. And what's even better is tying this all back to the Supreme Court re-examining Louisiana versus Calais to see if racial gerrymandering should even be permitted at all. And here's why. The Supreme Court is set to rule on race-based congressional districts. This would give the Republicans a massive advantage in 2026 midterms. And you know, the thing with the midterms is notoriously, if a Republican president gets elected in, typically what happens is 2 years later during the midterms, the Republican Party loses control of either the House or the Senate. But with Texas successfully redistricting its state to gain 5 additional Republican seats, and now this case being huge, the Supreme Court signaled on Friday that it is likely to rehear Louisiana versus Calais, a case that challenges the idea of race-based congressional districts. If they rule against this, other states are going to follow, creating a chain effect that would give Republicans a huge advantage heading into the 2026 midterms. Democrats could lose as many as 25 seats just through redistricting. And I believe that would have to be added on to the 5 that Texas just created, which could equate to a whopping 30 seats lost by the Democrats. You can see here this article quoted tweets saying, "I cannot stress to you enough how earth-shattering it would be for the Supreme Court to strike down Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The electoral cornerstone of the post-war liberal consensus would be gone overnight, and with it, the Democrat Party's ability to contest the House of Representatives as we know it. Between this and the potential mid-decade redistricting in a few other GOP-controlled states, Democrats would not be able to flip back the House of Representatives even if they ruthlessly gerrymandered every Republican out of California, as Gavin Newsom has threatened to do." The Supreme Court said Friday that it will weigh the constitutionality of a common form of redistricting used to protect the voting power of Black and Hispanic voters, the drawing of congressional districts where racial minorities make up at least half the population. Experts in election law said the move signals that the court may be poised to further narrow the Voting Rights Act. A ruling overturning the current map could result in Republicans picking up an additional congressional seat in Louisiana. The state's 2 majority Black districts are both represented by Democrats, while the other 4 districts are represented by Republicans. But if the court issues a sweeping decision that curtails or outlaws the use of race-based redistricting as a method of protecting minority voting power, the effects will be spread far beyond Louisiana. This would be huge. Combine that with the fact that Trump's immigration reform policy is working in stellar fashion, deporting roughly around 3,000 illegal immigrants per day. Most of those would be Democrat voters, mind you, because the Democrats don't only cheat by racial gerrymandering across the states, but what we saw during the Biden regime was the deliberate invasion of our country through open borders, flooding our nation with illegal immigrants, where the Democrats then issued a bunch of free stuff to the Democrats to literally buy their vote. This is why they're so protective of their sanctuary cities and why they're crying about things like Alligator Alcatraz and Trump's deportations without due process. They're watching all of their future voters be kicked out of our country, and now Trump's immigration reform policies are working so well that for the first time in 50 years, we are seeing possibly negative net migration, according to CNN. Take a listen to this.
How about net migration in the United States? Get this, it's down. It's going to be down at least 60%. We may be dealing with, get this, negative net migration to the United States in 2025. That would be the first time there is negative net migration in this country in at least 50 years. We're talking about down from 2.8 million in 2024. So Donald Trump has always run on tariffs, and he's run on a hawkish line on immigration. And on both of those issues, we are seeing record high tariff rates for this century going all the way back, well back into the early part of the 20th century. And when it comes to immigration, net migration, we are seeing record low levels, way down from where we were during the Biden administration. We are potentially looking at negative net migration for the first time in at least 50 years.
The Democrats are being squeezed in a way they've never been squeezed before. Not only are they watching their future voters be kicked out of this country through Trump's immigration policy reform, but they're also now witnessing the reality that these future voters who are being deported are not even being replaced by possible new ones trying to enter this country. And then tie in the fact that the mostly Republican Supreme Court majority could wind up ruling in favor of the Louisiana versus Calais case, banning racial gerrymandering in the future, not allowing Democrats to therefore cheat through their redistricting efforts as seen in states like Illinois. And the Democrats might wind up losing all future midterms at this point because their party favorability is at just 19%, with only 8% of voters being actually overwhelmingly pleased with them. They cannot win elections just off of naturalized American citizens alone, which is why they're so desperate to cheat through redistricting efforts and through the use of sanctuary cities and illegal immigrants. The Democrats are literally losing their minds right now. And if you're as happy about that as I am, be sure to subscribe right now to American Advocates, this channel, especially if this is your second or third time watching content from me and you haven't subscribed yet. Because if you do not subscribe to this channel right now, I will make sure that you end up in alligator Alcatraz. But now I'm going to pull up an amazing clip where the Democrats are so frustrated that they're just not even hiding their agenda anymore. I think the perfect representation of the Democrat agenda and the Democrat outrage over possibly losing their rights to racially gerrymander states, as well as watching all illegal immigrants being deported, is perfectly showcased by everyone's new favorite politician, Jasmine Crockett. Take a listen to this.
Do what this legislature is consistently been found to be guilty of doing, which is to make sure that they can do an overemphasis of Anglo voices in this state. Only 40% of this state is Anglo, yet somehow we have more than 60% of our seats that are elected by Anglo majority districts. As I said in 2021, as I argued against these maps, the math ain't mathing.
And so the math ain't mathin', and she hates Anglo representation. That's the new code word for I hate white people. And it shouldn't shock anybody because the Democrats have always hated white people, which is why they allowed the invasion of our country through minorities, and they bank on them for their votes. Tell me what your thoughts and opinions are on all this, though. Were you aware that racial gerrymandering was a problem before this video, or are you more aware of it now? Let me know in the comments below what you think about all this. Give this video a like for the algorithm, please, and thanks for watching.